Hello, my name is Rick McGee, instructor at Aries Self-Defense University. If you've read over your first module, 1.1, I sent you some information regarding the color code system of awareness. Just read it if you haven't, because I don't want to really go over it in this video. But just to highlight a few things, you have awareness levels of white, yellow, orange, red, and black. Each one of those presents a different level of alertness, awareness, and preparation. In today's video lesson, I want to discuss the attributes of avoidance. Now, a lot of times when we find ourselves somewhere where we wish we weren't, it's not necessarily something that we have full control of, meaning the environment. Because the environment, let's face it, can really change moment to moment. For example, if you go to the grocery store, your environment is relatively self-contained with the same type of people that have the same desires as you, meaning they want groceries, gift cards, whatever the case may be. So that's not typically something which we could avoid. In saying that, the same thing, using the same example of the grocery store, now I like using the terms good guy and bad guy just for simplicity purposes. So I don't want to sound redundant saying bad guy all the time, but that's just how it is. Bad guy implies bad guy, good guy implies probably you. So if you're in a grocery store line and the gentleman behind you just out of nowhere pulls a knife from the cashier and you just happen to be in front of him, that's a situation where you really can't avoid, because the escalation of the event happened while there was really nothing going on. It's almost like an ambush, and those are kind of hard to avoid. Avoidance that I want to address is twofold. One, you can avoid places of known hostilities and contentions, or the likelihood of. And two, you can avoid becoming the bad guy, or escalating moments in time, or escalating causation of violence. Those are important. So avoidance is going to be paramount in your self-defense training. It's going to help you to identify and recognize threats. It will help you as an individual be able to become a hard target. And so you're going to avoid the likelihood of a predator identifying you as a potential target. I will get into more of this discussion just briefly. Thank you. So how can we, as a self-defense community, whether you're a first responder, a concerned citizen, a college student, whatever the case may be, how can we avoid escalating the confrontation? Let's predispose that an individual walks up to you, maybe mistaking you for somebody else, or for a comment or gesture that you did or didn't say. Irregardless, the point I want to address is, if a person aggresses you verbally, there's some signs and indication of this. And as your training goes on and we delve more into the mental capacities and capabilities of the brain, as far as they relate to functions of self-preservation, you will learn that your response network has to be something that's reliable and dependable, which we'll discuss in greater detail in another video. But in the event that you are aggressed verbally, what I want you to do is to understand that it's part of our AEIOU system in the Aries Self-Defense program. But to understand the event for what it is and not to be drawn into it, because one of the hardest things to avoid is the ego. Um, the ego really stands in your way a lot of times of self-preservation as it relates to self-defense, as it relates to many other things, parts, segments of your life. But the ego, once it takes hold of you, your mind becomes borrowed, or rather hijacked, from a part of the brain called the amygdala. And once your amygdala takes over your thinking brain, your cognitive brain, it's very hard to avoid your actions at that point, because you're basically, essentially, you have a commonality with an animal's brain. An animal doesn't have a cognitive processing brain. They can't reason. They have instinction, which is part of the amygdala or fear conditioning process, but they don't possess the attributes that we do as humans. So once we trigger our ego, we become part of the problem and not a solution to it. When one person shouts at you and you shout back louder, the natural response is going to be for you to respond louder and for them to respond louder, and then the ego is tested, and then physical confrontation can shortly follow. I want to get more into the ego, and I want to discuss morals, values, and beliefs as these pertain to avoidance. So briefly and semi-generically, I want to talk about morals, values, and beliefs. We all know the definitions of those three words, but they have a composite amongst them that makes them individual, or individualized rather. So a lot of times friends and family don't talk about politics and religion, for example. Usually if you disagree with one, you're trying to state your side of the argument or your position, and it leads into an escalation. It's commonly just verbal, but I've been a part of and seen it transpire into a physical confrontation. Now, if it doesn't go to physical, and you're in an argument of state with another individual who's your friend or family member, there's a couple things that can happen post-event. One, you walk away no longer liking the person, you break off all ties. And two, you may have regrets. Sometimes in the heat of an argument, we tend to say things that we normally wouldn't, and like I said earlier, it's because the amygdala has taken over our thinking brain, and we go into an animalistic state of mind again. And sometimes, you can avoid having regret by again, by understanding the event and how it's coming climactic to a point of no return. I'm not saying that you need to be passive all the time in your positions or your arguments. I think it's just wise to choose your battles and to remain vigilant about your actions and avoid making decisions that you may later regret. It's why it's important to take those 10 deep breaths before you really say something that you shouldn't, or do something that you shouldn't do, because breathing invites cognition, which is a thinking brain, brings back rationality to the event, and it helps to avoid an escalation. So next time you're motivated to anger, try to avoid it. Take some deep breaths, think of your favorite song, think of things that will bring your cognition or your cognitive mind back into in charge of the situation. And finally, to conclude this segment on avoidance, I do want to state that avoidance and awareness is a theme that should be found rather amongst all communities of self-defense instructors or systems or styles, whatever the case may be. But a lot of times the instructors and the students, they just want to get to the meat and potatoes, which I call the physical development side of fighting, and that's important to have, but the most important base or foundation that you can develop as an individual is awareness and avoidance. Be aware, stay alert, stay focused when the time calls for it, be determined, to have the will to create injury or some circumstances lethal consequences, and also avoid the best you can to be in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Avoid not becoming part of the problem and controlling your ego. And you put those two elements together, you got about 85 to 90% of self-defense licked in the bud right there. It's just that it's that simple. And I hope not to overcomplicate things in this program. I do get long-winded, and I go from memory. I don't read a cue card. I don't look at notes. I have an vested interest in your personal safety. I have an vested interest in my abilities to communicate to you as a student, as a friend, and I have an vested interest in overall the goodness of humanity. And I believe out there it really does exist. But again, I would be imposing my morals, my values, and my beliefs upon you. Make those decisions yourself, and I'll see you in the next class at Aries University.